Welcome to the video. So if you're watching this, you're actually watching the replay of a conversation between me, Heidi Sylvestre, and Swiss glaciologist Matthias Huss from ETH Zürich. So today we're going to talk about my favorite topic, selfishly, which is mountain glaciers. And as you know, not a month, not a week goes by without receiving disastrous news about the world's glaciers. And only a few days ago, there was a giant study released in the journal Nature about the future of these mountain glaciers and telling us why they matter so much. So to talk about this study and to talk about mountain glaciers in general, I'm super happy to welcome Matthias Huss for about 30 minutes tonight. So just before I add Matthias to this conversation, and thank you, Matthias, I can see your request. Very quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, make sure you use the little question mark below. Otherwise, it's very difficult to see the questions in the comments. So let me invite Matthias to join me, and he should be joining me in a couple of seconds. But really, really grateful to have him. He's a busy man. And it's great to have you tonight. Yeah, hi, Matthias, how are you?
Hi, Heidi. Thanks for having me.
So nice to have you. I must say, I'm really excited about the conversation tonight. I'm sure you're very busy with a big study that was released only a few days ago. I have received tons of questions for you, and I'm sure we will get quite a few more in the question marks thing below. But perhaps to get started, Matthias, can I ask you to introduce yourself? And also, quite a few people were wondering, how did you get into the weird and wonderful world of glaciology? What got you to become a glaciologist?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Heidi, for being here. So it's a first for me on Instagram Live. I'm looking really forward to this conversation. So I'm a glaciologist from Fribourg. I studied at ETH Zürich, and I'm working at ETH Zürich, but also at the University of Fribourg and at VSL, but quite a lot of affiliations. And I'm the head of the Swiss glacial monitoring network, Glaciers. So what got me into this topic? So even as a child, I was very much interested in science and nature overall. So I first wanted to become a volcanologist, quite a different topic, but still. Then when I started to study, I wanted to become a meteorologist, interested in weather and climate. But then I realized that this climate and weather topic is a bit theoretical for me. And I finally, went around a bit and came back via glaciology to this topic of climate in a more applied sense.
Great. Wow, what a good story. I think we all were quite attracted into volcanology before getting into glaciology. But the good thing is that everything is connected. Volcanoes, ice, meteorology. And so what is it that you do kind of, I know it's hard to summarize, but on a daily basis, just to paint the picture to the people watching us tonight?
Yes, I kind of have two different focus of my work. So one is fieldwork, what I mainly do in Switzerland, meanwhile, and the other one is modeling. And I really very much like to connect the two parts. Not so many people really focus on fieldwork and modeling, but I think it's quite important to see both sides, because only if you're doing fieldwork and realize the processes outside, I think you can, bring them over into mathematical models that really help to make use of the data. So I really like this combination. So on the one hand, I'm responsible of acquiring Swiss glacial monitoring data. So we're outside mainly in April and in September, acquiring the data that documents the changes in Swiss glaciers. These time series are really long, sometimes over 100 years, and we're kind of continuing this legacy of our measurement, which is very interesting and helps us a lot to also have a better understanding. And then I'm also developing models So I started with models at a very local scale, individual glaciers, and then continuously extended to the global scale. These global scale studies, they really try to assess every single glacier at the global scale, every single of these 200,000 glaciers, and see how they respond to climate forcing, and therefore they allow us to make big statements about future sea level rise or the impact on hydrology.
Exactly. And as you said, it's not the normal that glaciologists have these two hats, that they spend a lot of time in the field, but also do quite extensive modeling work. And I can see that the two must fit right in and must really, work very well together. But I must say, Matthias, you have a bit of a reputation when it comes to field work, because you must be one of the fittest glaciologists out there. I've heard of so many stories of students trying to keep up with you on the glaciers. If you don't know, Matthias is an avid runner and keeps running on all the Swiss glaciers to perform all these amazing measurements that are very, very useful. But speaking of these measurements, what do you see on the Swiss glaciers at the moment? How did they fare last summer, and how are they getting on this winter? I think everybody has an idea what's happening to these glaciers, but what actually do you see in the field?
So let me first start with last summer. Last summer was really special because it broke all records that we had previously seen. First of all, also the last winter, 21, 22, started off with very thin snow coverage, especially in the southern side of the Alps, in Italy and France, even more than in Switzerland. So we knew really early that this year might become disastrous. At the end of the winter, we had kind of 40% less snow than usually. On some glaciers, it was even 60% less snow than usual. It was really impressive to be outside to see this extreme lack of snow, and therefore also the lack in the protection of the surface. So we still hoped that maybe the summer wouldn't be too hot, but we knew it turned out the other way. We had an extremely hot summer, was persistently good weather. The combination of these two effects resulted in absolute record mass losses. And actually, we never thought that this would be possible at all to see such huge losses of the glaciers. If you evaluate how probable it is to have such huge loss, the chances is more or less zero. But we saw that it did happen, and this also showed us that climate change is real. So something we expected for the far future that some model scenarios indicated had already become true, and this was really important to us to see it out in the field, but also then to analyze the data and really realize, well, it's this huge amount. So just to give a number, in the Swiss Alps, we lost 6% of the total remaining ice volumes.
You said 6%?
6% in one single year, and this is completely unprecedented. The heat in the summer of 2003, that was the previous record, removed not even 4%, and now we are 6%. So it's something completely new, but we can't exclude that something similar happens again. And actually right now, we're on a relatively similar track with very little snow in the Alps. So luckily we got some snow this night. No, at least at the high elevation, whereas at the low elevation where I live, it's still completely green, looks like spring or fall, but not like winter. And this is maybe something we need to get used to. It's a shame, but well, this is what we're facing.
Yeah, exactly. Really, really tough situation. But thank you for sharing these observations in the field. And quite a few people were asking me to ask you kind of to zoom out from the Swiss glaciers and tell us about, do you see the same thing in Patagonia, in the polar regions, in Alaska, in the Himalayas? Are all these glaciers also suffering from climate change at the moment? Are they suffering at the same rate? What are the similarities and maybe the differences between all these different mountain ranges?
Simplified, we can say that all glaciers globally are strongly receding. However, not all of them are losing mass at the same rate. In the Alps, glaciers are losing quite fast, but actually there are also regions like Alaska and Patagonia that are even on a reverse track. They are more influenced by the ocean and they are more sensitive to changes in climate, and therefore they even recede faster than those in the Alps. There are also some exceptions, some regions where glaciers have been stable for the past decades, like in the Karakoram Mountains, where we saw this anomaly, but sometimes also slightly advancing glaciers. But it's quite clear at the moment that this also was only a temporary phenomenon, and we're also turning again towards smooth slopes. So it is clearly the rising air temperatures that is causing these extreme drops in ice masses. The precipitation amount, the snow amount, is also a factor that mainly influences individual years, but it doesn't drive the long-term trends. The long-term trend is really determined by air temperature changes, whereas precipitation, snowfall, can be important for individual years, as we saw it in 2022, with very little snow that has, amplified the effect of summer heat waves.
Yeah, well, thank you for painting this very clear but very sad picture about the world's glaciers. But I must say, I'm on Svalbard here today, and we're having very, very little snow again this winter, and the snow is so important to kind of protect the glaciers during the coming summer months, right? It's kind of this protective layer, having this snow on these glaciers, and at the moment there's so little you couldn't even dig a snow pit, to be honest, on the glaciers of Svalbard. But perhaps it's a good time to move to the study that was released a couple of days ago in Science. From what I understood from the study, it said that even if we manage to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees, we would still lose about half of the world's glaciers by the end of the century. And a lot of media focused on this, but I was wondering, for you, what was the one thing that you would like us to remember about this study? What is kind of the key result? Is it how bad it is, or is it that we can still save some of this ice?
I think the key result, more for the scientific side, is that the losses totally are strongly dependent on the rises in temperature. So there is almost linear dependence of the volume we lose from glaciers on the changes in air temperature. This means if we manage to limit air temperature changes, we can also limit the losses in ice volume. So this is kind of a good news. It gives us the perspective for the future. If we really manage to limit air temperature change to 1.5 degrees, it means that we can also save a significant amount of additional ice. It is also quite important to realize that many of the studies for the futures, they stop at the year 2100, which is not actually the end. So if we manage to stabilize climate on 1.5 degrees, we can also stabilize glaciers more or less by 2100, and in the future we would be seeing kind of stable or maybe even like recovery of glaciers. However, if we have increasing air temperatures at +2, +3, +4 degrees, this is not the end for the glaciers at 2100. It will continue receding until 2300, maybe completely disappear. So it's quite important to also have this longer term perspective beyond 2100 that is often used in studies, because when the big impact really unfolds, it's at a very long time scale. However, these long time scales are also very difficult to be realized, to be captured by us.
No, exactly. I think it's so important to remind us of this, that climate change doesn't stop at the end of the century, that what is being set in motion right now could continue for centuries to come, in a good way and in a bad way as well. And to me, this study is also about hope. As you said, it's about how much ice we can preserve in these mountains only if we start to act right now. But now that we have a very clear idea of what's happening to the glaciers and what the future could be like, Matthias, why should we care? I mean, honestly, think about people who live maybe thousands of kilometers away from these glaciers, or who live close to mountain ranges but do not see the importance of these glaciers. Why should we care about these, 220,000 glaciers in the world? Give us like a good pep talk about why we should fight for them.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's also very important in communicating climate change and glacial change, that people understand why it's important to them. So basically, there is a suite of impacts from the local to the global scale why glaciers are important. So at the local scale, they're important for tourism, for cultural heritage, things like that. So we lose something if we lose the ice. This might touch people that go into the mountain for holiday, for skiing, but it might not touch people that stay in the cities all the time, of course. But the most important impact globally is very clearly the rise in global sea levels. This will affect billions of people by the end of the century and beyond. Glaciers are contributing to global sea levels quite importantly at the moment. Their total potential to contribute is not that high, but they're contributing a lot because they're sensitive to climate change. At the longer time scales, it is the ice sheets, Greenland and Antarctica, that will take over and become the main contributors. But for the next decades, it's really the glaciers that are quite important. And this rises in global sea level of maybe 50 centimeters to 1 meter by 2100, but between 1 meter and several meters up to 3 and 4 meters by 2300. This is really a threat to many, many big cities. And it mainly depends on the rate of sea level rise. So if sea levels are rising at a fast rate, it's almost impossible to adapt. If sea levels are rising at a slower rate, it is still possible to adapt ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, sea level rise will not just affect people on coastlines, it will affect the entire planet. So whether you live at 1,000 meters high or down at sea level, that's for sure. And I love the expression of considering these glaciers as being water towers, right? The water towers of our countries. And this is very clear in the Himalayas, in the European Alps. And, I really look up to, when it comes to the glaciology, but also all the science communication that you do. I mean, you are a relentless science communicator. You work with a lot of NGOs as well, like Protect Our Winters, for example. But what do you say to the policymakers, to the people in Switzerland, to make them care about the glaciers there? Because it's obviously not sea level rise that will impact Switzerland directly, but what are the key kind of buttons you can press to make them care?
In Switzerland, indeed, it's mainly the hydrological impact that matters most. In Switzerland, but also in other mid to low latitude regions as Central Asia, the Southern Andes, glaciers are water towers, as you said. They release a lot of water during dry and hot periods, exactly when we need the water. And this water is really used. It is used for maintaining the flow of the rivers, for irrigation, for drinking water, for shipping traffic, but also to fill up the hydropower plants. In Switzerland, and I think the Alps in general, more than half of the electricity is produced by hydropower, and these hydropower reservoirs, they're mostly filled up by waters from the glaciers. In that sense, we're in a very good situation in the Alps at the moment, because even though the last summer has been very dry, the glaciers strongly melted, therefore easily filling up the reservoirs And this brings us to the energy crisis. However, if we repeat the same summer of 22 in 30 years or so, we would not be able to fill up the reservoir so well, and therefore also have less energy at disposal during the coming winter. So these provision of waters to the downstream areas is really important, and it is an effect that will get lost in the future, because it only works, this function is only maintained as long as glaciers are present. And we already see it now. Glaciers areas are strongly shrinking, and this buffering capacity is getting lost. And I think this should worry us. It is not the end. We will still have water in the rivers, but it will come at different times of the years. But we know now, so we have still time to adapt. And this is something we should consider, because we know where this is heading to.
Wow, well, that couldn't be clearer, and I'm sure that people care when they listen to you saying this. And speaking of adaptation, I think I have one last question for you before we start taking other people's questions. You mentioned adaptation, but what can we do, perhaps first in terms of adaptation, but also what can we do to mitigate the loss of these glaciers? I think people hopefully on the call here now understand how bad the situation is, but really want to do something about this. So what do you tell when people ask you, I really want to do something, I don't know where to get started?
Well, if we want to save glaciers, there's just one way. We need to save the climate. And saving the climate obviously is not a simple task, but we know where to start. We need to reduce CO2 emissions. This can be done at the level of each of us ourselves. But finally, we need the politicians to, give some guidelines to make things consistent, and also to bring the actions of the different nations together. Because this is a problem that can only be saved as a global community, not even at the national community, but it needs to be saved globally. And obviously, this is really, really difficult, as the political negotiations show. But I'm confident that we're going into the right directions. I think the discussions going on at the moment have indicated that the governments have realized the problems. They want to act. We're still quite a bit away of really the actions we need, but I think we're in a good way, and we need to insist. Bringing over this message and making people realize that it's still time to avoid the worst of the effects.
That's the spirit, Matthias, absolutely. And I'm sure there are quite a few budding glaciologists and scientists on the call here today who listen and definitely learn from this, that we absolutely need scientists to be out there to work with the governments, to work with the private sector, just to make sure collectively that we all reduce our impact on the climate, on the planet. So I promised Matthias to take a few questions that were sent to me over the past few days. One of them is pretty technical. It's from Elliot, who studies glaciers in Patagonia, but also in the Pyrenees. And he was asking me very quickly, if you go back to the big study that you published in Science a few days ago, it appears that the glaciers in Alaska would reach their peak in melting by the middle of the century. Is it true? And very quickly, what is happening to the glaciers of Patagonia? You mentioned that the two are changing very quickly, but is the peak of melting in Patagonia going to come sooner or later than Alaska? Bit technical.
Oh, that's quite technical, and because I would actually need to look up the.
I can tell him to send you a message if it's too tricky.
But I would say that for those glaciers, I mean, both in Alaska and Patagonia, we have huge glaciers, and although they melt very quickly, there is a big reservoir, so the time lag is very strong to reach this peak in melting. So even though they melt strongly, they reduce in thickness and size, the melting still increases. So I would rather expect that Patagonia and Alaska have their peaks after 2050 towards the end of the century, although for some smaller glaciers in these regions, we might also reach this peak a bit early.
All right, great. He has his answer. And don't be sorry about the question, Eliot. Thank you for asking it. We got another question that is definitely making me think, Matthias, can we live without glaciers?
It's a very good question. I would say definitely yes. We already have now some regions, let us think of the Pyrenees, that had some glaciation that has already almost completely disappeared. And this mountain range is still beautiful. It hasn't crumbled. It is still there. Life will change. It will change in the mountain. It will change for hikers and mountaineers, of course. But I think we can easily live without glaciers, but we just need time to adapt ourselves to prepare for changing amounts of waters running in the streams, prepare for more unstable mountain flanks. It's a question of adapting, and I think this is possible to be done.
Thank you for that. And when it comes to adapting, there is also its bad sister or bad brother, which is maladapting. And I know you're someone who is very vocal about geoengineering in general. I try to be as well. And something that we see peppering the mountains in the Alps at the moment are these white sheets that cover the glaciers parts of the year. We know they're very efficient where they're being installed. What do you think about those? I know what you're going to answer, but is it a realistic solution to save the glaciers in the mountains?
Thanks for this question. I think it's very important to understand the use of these white blankets and geoengineering in general. It has never been intended to use it to save a glacier. It has been intended to support some economic activities. This means there's some specific revenue from preserving the ice if you cover the ice with these blankets, and you can really save a lot of ice locally if you do it, but it costs a lot of money. So you can do it at a scale of a few hundred square meters or a few thousand square meters, but you could never do it at the scale of an entire glacier or even at the entire mountain range. This would, first of all, be extremely expensive, so this money could be invested much better into other things like climate mitigation, and also it would be ecologically extremely problematic. If this is done at a local scale, the plastic pollution is maybe not a huge issue. It is certainly also an issue, but if you do it at a bigger scale, it will completely pollute the rivers.
Well, that's very clear. That's quite sobering. And thank you for that, Matthias. We're reaching almost the end of this conversation. Before we close this live, I wanted to ask you if you had maybe one call to action. I know it's not easy, especially when it comes to glaciers, but if there is one thing with hope, with positivity that you would like to share with the people watching tonight, I think we all need a little bit of hope and a good call to action. So please, Matthias, the floor is yours.
Well, I like glaciers. I like them a lot. And I would really love to see that my kids and my grandkids maybe are still able to see some glaciers when they are grown up. We can still change something. There is still hope if we reduce CO2 emissions very fast. If we limit global warming at 1.5 degrees, we're still able to save the biggest glaciers in the Alps. We're save many glaciers around the poles, and we are able to limit the effects. So let's all go there and act, try to do it to be able to save some glaciers, but also to save the climate.
Oh, this is exactly what we needed. Thank you so much for this, Matthias. Feels good in the heart to hear this. And thank you for making the time today to spend half an hour with us. I really, really appreciate it. I think we went full circle trying to understand what's happening to the glaciers, why they matter, and what we can do to try to preserve them for as long as possible. We need to act now. There's definitely no time to waste. Please make sure you follow Matthias' work. I know you're very active on Twitter, but if you bump into him in the mountains, make sure you ask him lots of questions. You're such a great advocate for preserving the glaciers, so please continue doing this. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Matthias. Have a nice evening, everyone, and see you soon.